Whispers on the prairie. The needle, a fleeting silver spark in the dim light, danced as Sarah mended the threadbare fabric of Caleb's trousers. Sunlight filtered through the gossamer patches, evidence of the prairie's unrelenting demands. She narrowed her gaze against the candle's wavering glow, each stitch imbued with a silent supplication for fortitude, for a future spared of such hardship. The wind, an incessant presence since Thomas's death, clawed at the cabin, rattling the fragile glass. Tonight, its voice was a sibilant lament, a disquieting susurrus that permeated the very timbers. Hours ago, Caleb had departed to trap a rabbit. A scant supply of beans was all that stood between them and deeper hunger. Samuel, bless his generous spirit, offered no complaints, but the gauntness of his face spoke volumes. He clutched his bowl a shade too tight. A sudden gust battered the door, making Sarah flinch. The prick of the needle drew a single drop of blood, which she instinctively touched to her tongue, her eyes fixed on the entrance where Caleb would eventually appear. The prairie wind deepened its mournful tune, weaving anxieties of isolation and despair. She suppressed the encroaching darkness. She must. The door hinges finally groaned in protest as Caleb entered, his posture defeated. The rabbit snare hung limp from his hand. Empty, Ma, he muttered, avoiding her eyes as he tossed the useless trap onto the table. Candlelight illuminated the dust and highlighted the despair etched on his young features. Sarah summoned a smile, thin as the patched fabric. "It's all right, son. We have some beans left." He remained downcast. He knew, as she did, that their remaining stores were woefully inadequate. From his corner, Samuel, mid-hum, briefly betrayed his worry before plastering on a hopeful grin. "Tomorrow, Caleb. A big one tomorrow." He launched into a simple, off-key melody of sunshine and golden fields, a world away from their grim reality. It was a tune their father once favored, a song that spoke of promise. Sarah's heart ached. Samuel, so young yet the guardian of their spirits. She embraced him tightly. "That's right, Sammy. Tomorrow will be brighter." She kissed his head, inhaling the familiar scent of wood smoke and youthful innocence. Beans it was for supper. A meager portion for each, barely staving off hunger. Outside, the wind continued its relentless assault, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. Sarah listened intently, searching for meaning carried on the prairie breath, feeling like an ill omen. Caleb pushed away his almost untouched bowl. "Not hungry," he mumbled, a transparent lie. He was offering his share to his brother. "You need to eat, Caleb," she encouraged gently. "You need strength." He stubbornly resisted. "Samuel needs it more." Sarah relented. She divided his portion between her bowl and Samuel's. Samuel met her gaze, understanding flickering in his eyes. He ate with careful deliberation, savoring each mouthful. Afterwards, Caleb helped Sarah bank the fire, nestling the embers beneath ash to nurture them through the night. Samuel, still humming his optimistic ditty, gathered the empty bowls. The wind howled on, its desolate cries permeating the small, vulnerable dwelling. As they huddled together for warmth beneath a worn quilt, a pervasive sense of dread settled over Sarah. The prairie's whispers seemed to close in, circling them like predators. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for strength, for guidance, for salvation. She prayed that dawn would not only break a new day but also cast a ray of hope into their shadowed existence. The wolves at the door. The crunch of wagon wheels on the frozen ground sliced through the thin silence of the morning. Sarah, chopping wood with a dull axe, straightened, her back protesting. The vehicle was far grander than any she'd seen in months, a polished conveyance pulled by two matched bays, their breath pluming in the frigid air. It definitely wasn't a neighbor. A wave of dread, heavier than the axe in her hand, washed over her. The wagon halted before the cabin. Two figures, stiff and formal in dark wool coats, descended. Silas and Martha Evans, her late husband Thomas's brother, and his wife. She hadn't seen them since the funeral. Silas, his face a map of displeasure etched in deep lines, offered a curt nod. Martha, her lips pursed into a permanent frown, simply surveyed the dilapidated cabin with a disdainful sweep of her gaze. "Sarah," Silas said, his voice raspy. "We came as soon as we could." Sarah lowered the axe, its head thudding softly into the snow-dusted earth. "Silas." "Martha. I wasn't expecting you." "We understand this must be a difficult time," Martha said, her tone betraying no such understanding. Losing Thomas so suddenly, she shook her head, a practiced gesture of sorrow. "Such a strong man. Though, perhaps," she added, her eyes flickering over the unkempt yard, "he overworked himself. A man needs a wife who can," she trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. Caleb emerged from the cabin, Samuel clinging to his leg. Caleb's eyes, sharp and assessing, darted between the newcomers and his mother. He positioned himself slightly in front of Samuel, a silent protector. Caleb, Sarah said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Say hello to Uncle Silas and Aunt Martha. Caleb mumbled a greeting, his gaze unwavering. Samuel, usually so quick to offer a smile, remained hidden behind his brother. Silas cleared his throat. We've come to discuss the farm. Thomas left things in a complicated state. He gestured towards the fields, brown and barren under the winter sky. It's clear you're struggling, Sarah. Running a farm is no easy task, especially for a woman alone. I'm managing, Sarah said, her voice tight. Martha snorted softly. Managing? The roof is caving in, the fences are broken, and the fields are, well, they speak for themselves. She opened the wagon door and retrieved a leather satchel. We've brought some documents. Legal matters, you understand. Best to get these things settled promptly. Silas produced the documents, a stack of papers filled with dense, unfamiliar language. Sarah's head swam as she scanned the pages. Words like probate, estate, and lien blurred together. What are these? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Simply transferring ownership, Silas said smoothly. The farm, the livestock, everything. To us. We'll ensure the boys are taken care of course. Proper schooling, good food, things you can no longer provide. Taken care of? Caleb stepped forward, his fists clenched. We don't need you to take care of us. Caleb, please, Sarah said, her hand tightening on his shoulder. She looked from Silas to Martha, her eyes pleading. This is our home. Thomas built this place. You can't just take it. Thomas was a good man, but not a practical one, Martha said, her voice cold. He left you in a situation you can't handle. This is the only sensible solution. She pushed a pen into Sarah's hand. Just sign here, here, and here. Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting to her sons. Their faces, etched with fear and confusion, tore at her heart. She knew, deep down, that she couldn't fight them. She didn't understand the documents, and they knew it. She was trapped. With trembling hands, she signed. Silas retrieved the documents, a grim satisfaction etched on his face. It's for the best, Sarah. For everyone. Martha's eyes landed on the cabin. We'll give you until sundown. Pack your things and be gone. The wagon rumbled away, leaving Sarah and her son standing in the snow, the silence broken only by Samuel's quiet sob. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a mocking reminder of the beauty they were about to lose. Homeless on the plains. The dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the bare window panes. Sarah moved with a quiet efficiency born of years of making do. Everything they owned, everything that represented their life before Thomas's death and Silas's treachery now had to fit into a single, worn sack. Her fingers trembled as she folded Thomas's worn flannel shirt, the scent of wood smoke clinging faintly to the fabric. She paused, pressing it to her face, then resolutely tucked it away. No room for sentimentality now, only survival. She rationed the remaining flour and salt pork, wrapping them tightly in oilcloth. Caleb was outside, seeing to the last of their meager livestock, a scrawny hen named Henrietta and a sway-backed mule they called Bess. Samuel, bless his heart, was trying to catch a grasshopper, his small net waving wildly. Caleb, are you ready? Sarah called, her voice tight. Caleb emerged from the barn, his face etched with a grim determination that belied his 12 years. He didn't answer, but his jaw was set and his eyes burned with a mixture of anger and sadness as he looked back at the house that wasn't theirs anymore. He spat on the ground. Don't, Caleb, Sarah said softly, her hand reaching out to smooth his hair. It's not worth wasting your energy on hate. He pulled away, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Where are we going, Ma? She didn't have an answer. West for now. Maybe we can find work on another farm. Or, her voice trailed off. The possibilities were bleak and she didn't want to voice her fears aloud. Samuel, sensing the tension, skipped over, clutching a jar with a single, lonely grasshopper inside. Look, Ma. I caught him. We can call him Hopper and he can be our pet. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his attempt at cheerfulness. Sarah forced a smile. That's a fine grasshopper, Samuel. But he'd be happier if we let him go. She released the insect, watching it leap into the tall grass. They had to be like that grasshopper, resilient, adaptable, ready to jump towards any opportunity. Bess was hitched to a rickety wagon Sarah had managed to cobble together from spare parts. It wasn't much, but it would carry their few possessions and offer some protection from the elements. The vastness of the prairie stretched before them, an endless expanse of waving grass and shimmering heat. It was beautiful, yes, but also terrifying in its immensity. As they started their journey, Caleb walked beside Bess, his hand resting on her flank. The wheels of the wagon groaned in protest, a mournful soundtrack to their departure. Samuel trailed behind, kicking up dust. "Tell me a joke, Samuel," Sarah said, hoping to lighten the mood. Samuel racked his brain. "What do you call a cow with no legs?" He paused, his voice trembling slightly. "Ground beef." The joke fell flat, but Sarah laughed anyway, a strained, shaky sound. Caleb managed a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They walked for hours, the sun beating down on their backs. The landscape remained unchanged, an endless sea of grass that seemed to swallow them whole. Sarah's hope began to wane with the setting sun. Caleb stopped Bess. "Ma, we need water." Sarah knew their supply was dwindling. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of life, any indication of a well or a stream. There was nothing. Just the endless grass and the deepening shadows. She felt a cold dread creep into her heart. This vast, beautiful prairie could easily become their grave. The hard road, the aptly named road, punished them relentlessly. Each dawn resurrected the ache in their limbs, the hollow pit in their stomachs, and the silent, pressing question of their destination. Sarah masked her anxieties, gesturing toward the distant, shimmering mountains with a strained optimism. But Caleb saw through the charade. First, the rain whispered promises of relief, then it descended, a roaring deluge. Icy needles plastered their hair, saturating their worn garments in moments. They huddled beneath a skeletal bush, its pathetic branches offering negligible reprieve. Sarah drew Samuel closer, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that racked his small frame, his teeth a frantic percussion. Caleb, ignoring his own misery, stood sentinel, eyes sweeping the horizon, searching for sanctuary or some glimmer of hope. "It's pointless, Ma," Caleb finally said, his voice strained. "It's only making things worse. We need better shelter." Sarah's embrace tightened around Samuel. "There isn't any, Caleb. Just endure it." "Endure it? We'll freeze solid. We should have followed my idea and headed north. Pa always said the soil was fertile there. Silas wouldn't expect that move." Sarah's jaw set. "Silas is irrelevant now, Caleb. And your pa's counsel is beyond our reach." The unspoken grief hung thicker than the rain. Caleb spun away, fists clenched against the rising tide of despair. The downpour intensified, a relentless drumming on the parched earth and their fragile refuge. Argument was useless, he knew, but the sense of impotence gnawed at him. He was their protector, and all he could offer was a shared soaking and a hollow stomach. The days blurred into weeks, each indistinguishable from the last. Their meager stores dwindled at an alarming rate. Sarah meticulously portioned what remained, dividing the dwindling biscuits into fragments. One sunset, as the sky blazed with strokes of crimson and violet, Samuel, with quiet gravity, offered Sarah his final crumb. "Here, Ma," his voice was almost a whisper. "You need it more." Her heart wrenched. Observing his wan features, the hollows beneath his eyes, she understood the depth of his hunger. She gently nudged the crumb back. "No, Samuel. You must have it. It will help with your strength." Caleb, who had been lost in the dance of the flames, pivoted toward them. He reached over, snapped the biscuit in two, and offered a piece to his mother. "We'll share." They ate in silence, this paltry offering a monument to their enduring love and unyielding spirit. The biscuit was dry and tasteless, yet it sparked a warmth that transcended mere sustenance. They were not alone on this arduous journey. Encounters with other families punctuated their days, some benevolent, some guarded, others outright predatory. One such group, their faces etched with the harsh realities of survival, cast covetous glances at their meager wagon. Sarah's fingers instinctively tightened around the handle of the tarnished knife concealed beneath her skirts, her gaze unwavering. Caleb positioned himself beside her, his young body coiled tight, ready to defend his family. The moment passed without bloodshed, but the encounter left Sarah shaken, a stark reminder of the lurking dangers of the trail. One dawn, Sarah awoke to find Caleb missing. A wave of icy panic washed over her. She searched frantically, her voice. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, she saw him returning. His shoulders slumped with fatigue, dragging a lifeless rabbit. "Found it caught in a snare," he mumbled, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's not much, but it's something." Sarah rushed to him, enveloping him in a fierce embrace. "You terrified me, Caleb. Never do that again." He returned the hug, burying his face in her hair. "I won't, Ma. Promise." That night, they roasted the rabbit, savoring each precious scrap of meat. It was the most satisfying meal they'd had in weeks. As they ate, Sarah studied her sons, their faces painted in the flickering firelight. Despite the brutal hardships, the ever-present fear, and the gnawing uncertainty, they remained a unit, and she grasped that this unity was paramount. It, coupled with the unwavering determination burning within her, the resolve to shield them, to forge a new beginning, was all that mattered, regardless of the trials the grueling road presented. Fading hope. Whirlwinds skittered across the baked earth, taunting their sluggish advance. What had begun as an adventure was now a soul-crushing expanse of ochre and dust, each sunrise a carbon copy of the last. Their supplies dwindled with alarming speed. Yesterday marked the end of the dried apples, and the last sliver of cured pork was vanishing fast. Caleb stalked through the meager scrub, his handmade snare poised. A squirrel, fat and careless, had been stuffing itself with acorns earlier. A flash of russet fur, then gone, swallowed by the thorny embrace of an ancient oak before Caleb could react. He meticulously reset the trap, frustration tightening his jaw. Another hour crawled by under the blazing sun. He checked the snare again. Still empty. With a frustrated grunt, he sent a pebble flying across the arid ground. "Damn it," he rasped, the word a bitter taste. Back at their meager camp, he simply shook his head at his mother's unspoken question. Nothing. Samuel, who had been humming a threadbare tune, silenced himself. He used to possess a repertoire of ballads learned from his father, songs that had once filled the air with vibrant courage. Now his voice was a frail echo, like wind chimes in a dying breeze. Sarah watched them both, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon. She sat on a fallen log, its bark peeling like snake skin shedding in the sun. Dust clung to her skirt undisturbed. Her face, typically set in a determined line, was now soft, almost vacant. The fight seemed to have been leached out of her, leaving behind a husk. She stared blankly ahead, as if attempting to penetrate the endless vista, to glimpse a future that stubbornly refused to materialize. "Water. We're running low," Caleb stated, the silence broken. His voice carried an edge he hadn't intended. No response. He knelt, taking her arm in his hand. Her skin felt brittle and thin beneath his touch. "Ma?" She blinked, pulled back from some distant place. Water. We need to find some." A slow nod. "Yes. Water." But her tone was devoid of conviction, merely a rote repetition. Samuel edged closer, seeking solace against his mother's side. He coughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I'm thirsty, Ma." Sarah's hand, trembling almost imperceptibly, rose to stroke his hair. "I know, darling. We will find some. We will." The words rang hollow, a fragile promise even to her own ears. Despair, like a venomous snake, constricted her spirit, stealing her will. Caleb rose, his gaze sweeping the horizon. He scrambled up a small rise, desperate for anything that might offer respite. A cluster of trees, the promise of rain, even the silhouette of a buzzard circling overhead. But there was only the pitiless sun and the vast, relentless terrain. A wave of anger surged through him, not at the land itself, but at the sheer injustice of their predicament. At the men who had forced them from their home, at the cruel hand of fate that had abandoned them here. He rejoined his mother and brother, his expression set. He knew he had to be their strength, but the burden weighed heavily. He studied Sarah, her eyes glazed with hopelessness, then Samuel, his face gaunt. The ember of hope that had sustained him, the conviction that they could persevere, flickered weakly, threatened by the gale of despair. He wanted to shout, to curse the heavens, but such a display would offer no reprieve. Water. Food. Survival. These were his only imperatives. But facing the immensity of their plight, he was at a loss. A miraculous encounter. The sun beat down, a merciless hammer against their backs. Sarah's knees buckled, sending her crashing to the parched earth near what was once a creek bed. The ground was cracked and dry, mirroring the desperation in her heart. Caleb stumbled, catching himself on a withered bush. Samuel simply crumpled, his small body a heap of dusty clothes and bone. "Mama." Caleb's voice was a dry rasp. Sarah tried to rise, but her limbs felt leaden. "Just rest, Caleb. Just for a moment." Her voice was barely a whisper. She knew they needed to keep moving, needed to find water, but her strength had abandoned her. Despair, cold and heavy, threatened to engulf her completely. She couldn't fail them. Not now. Caleb crawled to Samuel, cradling his brother's head in his lap. Samuel's skin was hot and dry. His breathing shallow. Caleb looked at his mother, his young face etched with worry that mirrored her own. A fly buzzed lazily around Sarah's head, a mocking reminder of their impending doom. She closed her eyes, picturing John's face, his easy smile, the strength in his arms. A pang of grief, sharp and agonizing, pierced through her numbness. She had promised him she would protect their sons. She was failing. A distant sound, a low rumble barely audible above the buzzing in her ears, caught Caleb's attention. He strained his eyes, scanning the horizon. A cloud of dust, small at first, grew steadily larger. "Mama," he croaked, "someone's coming." Sarah forced her eyes open, shielding them with a trembling hand. A lone rider, silhouetted against the blinding sun, was approaching. Hope, a fragile butterfly, fluttered in her chest. But caution, born of recent betrayal, held her back. The rider drew closer, the rhythmic thud of hooves growing louder. He was tall and lean, his face hidden beneath the wide brim of a weathered hat. He rode a sturdy-looking horse, its coat the color of sun-baked clay. He reined in his horse a few feet away, the animal snorting, kicking up a small cloud of dust. The rider dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was dressed in worn denim and a faded blue shirt, a red bandana tied loosely around his neck. His eyes, when he finally looked up, were the color of the summer sky, crinkled at the corners from years spent squinting into the sun. "You folks in need of help?" His voice was low and gravelly but held a note of genuine concern. Sarah hesitated. Her instincts screamed at her to be wary. "But Samuel." "Water," Caleb pleaded, his voice hoarse. "We need water." The man's gaze softened as he looked at Samuel. Without a word, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen. He knelt beside the boy, gently lifting his head. "Easy now, son," he murmured, tilting the canteen to Samuel's lips. Samuel drank greedily, the water dribbling down his chin. Sarah watched, her heart aching. The man's kindness, so unexpected, brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice thick with emotion. The man simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. He offered the canteen to Caleb, who drank more cautiously, then handed it to Sarah. The water was cool and refreshing, a balm to her parched throat. "My name's Jedediah," he said, finally breaking the silence. "Most folks call me Jed." Sarah swallowed, trying to compose herself. "I'm Sarah. This is Caleb, and my youngest is Samuel." She paused, her voice catching in her throat. We lost everything." Jedediah's eyes held a depth of understanding. "I reckon a lot of folks have these days." He didn't pry, didn't ask questions. He simply offered what he had. "I got a small camp a few miles from here. Got some food, some shade. You're welcome to share it." Sarah looked at her sons, at their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. She looked back at Jedediah, at the quiet strength in his eyes. She made her decision. "We would be grateful, Jedediah." Sharing stories. The canteen felt blessedly cool against Sarah's cracked lips. She watched Caleb and Samuel gulp down water, their faces streaked with dust and relief. Jedediah stood a respectful distance away, his gaze fixed on the horizon, giving them space to recover. When the boys were finished, Jedediah turned back, his weathered face etched with concern. "You folks been traveling long?" Sarah hesitated. Suspicion, a constant companion these days, gnawed at her. But Jedediah's eyes held a sincerity that chipped away at her defenses. She swallowed hard, the story a bitter lump in her throat. "Long enough," she said, her voice raspy. "My husband, he died of fever back in Illinois. We were farmers." Jedediah nodded slowly. "A hard life, farming." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "It was until my husband's family decided they didn't want us anymore. They took everything. The farm, the livestock, everything. Said I wasn't family now that Thomas was gone." Her voice trembled, the raw pain of betrayal surfacing. "They left us with nothing. Not even enough to bury him properly." Samuel, sensing her distress, reached for her hand. Caleb, ever the protector, glared at the ground, his jaw tight. Jedediah's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Family can be a cruel thing," he murmured, his voice thick with unspoken sorrow. Sarah recounted their journey westward, the hardships they faced, the constant fear of starvation, the endless expanse of unforgiving land. She spoke of the kindness of strangers, fleeting moments of hope amidst the despair, and the unwavering spirit of her sons that kept her going. She omitted the details of the cruelty her in-laws inflicted, the specific words they spoke, the callousness that still echoed in her nightmares. Some wounds were too deep to expose even to a man like Jedediah, who seemed to carry his own burdens with quiet dignity. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the air. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the darkness of her tale. Jedediah finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "I have a small ranch not far from here. It ain't much, but it's shelter. And I have more than enough food for myself." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "You're welcome to stay. As long as you need." Relief washed over Sarah, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. She had expected nothing, dared to hope for even less. We couldn't possibly impose. Jedediah shook his head. No imposition. I live alone. Company would be welcome. And those boys look like they could use a good meal and a soft bed. He glanced at Caleb and Samuel, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Besides, he added, his eyes twinkling slightly, I could use some help tending the horses. Caleb's face lit up. I know horses. Sarah looked at her sons, their faces mirroring her own mixture of exhaustion and hope. She looked back at Jedediah, his weathered face an honest map of kindness. The decision was made. We accept, Jedediah, she said, her voice thick with gratitude. Thank you. He nodded, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Come on. Let's get you to the ranch before nightfall. He turned his horse, and with a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah, Caleb, and Samuel followed, their steps lighter, their hearts a little less heavy, towards the promise of shelter and, perhaps, a new beginning. The air, which had moments before felt stifling and unforgiving, now carried the scent of sage and the faint hope of something better. Life on the ranch. The sun, a relentless taskmaster, beat down on Sarah's back as she strained to pull the rusted fence wire taut. Jedediah, his face weathered like old leather, worked alongside her, his movements economical and strong. He'd shown her how to brace her feet, how to use the pliers to crimp the wire just so. Each repaired section was a small victory against the endless prairie, a bolstering of their fragile foothold. Hold it steady now, Jedediah grunted, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he assessed her progress. You're a fast learner, Sarah. She managed a weak smile, her muscles aching. Necessity, she replied, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. It's a powerful teacher. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and dust, a constant reminder of the harsh environment. But there was something else too, a faint, sweet fragrance that tugged at her memory. She looked towards the small patch of tilled earth near the house. Samuel. Caleb, meanwhile, was locked in his own battle of wills. Astride a gentle, patient mare named Bess, he gripped the reins with white knuckles. Jedediah, standing close by, offered quiet instructions. Easy now, son. Feel her. She'll respond to your touch, not your force. Caleb's face, usually alight with mischief, was etched with concentration. He'd fallen twice already, the sting of the dry earth a sharp lesson. But he wouldn't quit. He was determined to master this beast, to become one with the land, to prove himself worthy of this new life. Sarah watched from a distance, a knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. She longed to shield him from every potential hardship but knew she couldn't. He had to learn, to grow, to become the man he was meant to be. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah found Samuel kneeling in his garden. The small patch of earth, barely larger than a blanket, was a riot of color. He had planted wildflowers salvaged from the prairie alongside a few precious vegetable seeds Jedediah had given him. Tiny green shoots were already pushing through the soil, a testament to his unwavering optimism. Look, Mama, Samuel exclaimed, his eyes shining. They're growing, just like Jedediah said they would. Sarah knelt beside him, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He was so resilient, so full of life, despite everything they had endured. She reached out and gently touched a delicate petal, feeling its velvety softness. They're beautiful, Samuel, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You have a gift for making things grow. He beamed at her, his face dusted with dirt. Jedediah says even the desert can bloom if you give it enough love. Love. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Could she, after all that had happened, learn to love again? Could she trust enough to let someone else into her heart? That night, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Sarah sat on the porch with Jedediah. The air was cool and still, filled with the chirping of crickets. He sat in his usual stoic silence, gazing out at the darkening landscape. Thank you, Jedediah, Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. For everything. He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the faint light of the moon. You earned it, Sarah. You and your boys. You're strong. You'll make this work. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight of sincerity that touched her deeply. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe they could make this work. Maybe here on this remote ranch they could finally find a place to call home. A budding romance. The scent of sagebrush hung heavy in the evening air as Sarah and Jedediah sat on the porch steps, a simple supper of beans and cornbread between them. The vast prairie stretched before them, a canvas of fading light and emerging stars. Crickets chirped their nightly chorus, a soothing counterpoint to the day's relentless sun. Thank you, Jedediah, Sarah said, her voice soft. For everything. He simply nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Just doing what's right. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clinking of their forks and the occasional rustle of the wind through the tall grass. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the earth, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jedediah spoke again. "Tell me about your home," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Back east." Sarah hesitated, the memories both precious and painful. But she found herself opening up, describing the rolling hills of Kentucky, the apple orchard behind their house, the laughter of her boys echoing through the fields. She spoke of Thomas, too, carefully, focusing on the good times, the love they had shared before greed and betrayal had poisoned everything. Jedediah listened patiently, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, a tear traced a path down her cheek. He reached out, his calloused hand gently wiping it away. His touch was warm, comforting, and a spark flickered within her, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. "You're strong, Sarah," he said quietly. "Stronger than you know." The next morning, Jedediah announced he was going to teach her how to shoot. Caleb, momentarily forgetting his own equestrian woes, practically vibrated with excitement. Samuel, ever practical, asked if they could shoot rabbits for supper. Jedediah chuckled, a rare and welcome sound. "We'll start with targets," he said. "Rabbits come later." He set up a row of tin cans on a weathered fence post and showed Sarah how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe. He stood close behind her, his arm brushing against hers as he adjusted her stance. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of nervousness and something else, something akin to anticipation. Her first few shots were wild, the bullets kicking up dust far from the targets. But Jedediah was patient, offering gentle corrections, encouragement. Slowly, she began to find her mark. The cans rattled and danced as the bullets found their target, a small victory that brought a smile to her face. Later that week, while Caleb was attempting to lasso a particularly stubborn calf and failing spectacularly, Samuel proudly showed Sarah his burgeoning garden. Tiny green shoots were emerging from the earth, a testament to his care and dedication. Jedediah watched from the porch, a smile playing on his lips. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the yard, scattering Samuel's carefully arranged seed packets. Sarah gasped as one caught in her hair, a comical tangle of paper and dried seeds. She tried to untangle it, but only made it worse. Jedediah strode over, his eyes twinkling. "Here, let me," he said, his fingers gentle as he worked to free the packet. As he carefully untangled the mess, their hands brushed and their eyes met. A shared smile erupted between them, a genuine, unguarded moment of pure joy. Sarah threw her head back and laughed, the sound echoing across the prairie, light and free. Jedediah joined in, his deep rumble blending with her laughter, creating a melody of happiness that chased away the shadows of the past, if only for a little while. The sound drew Caleb and Samuel near. Even Caleb joined in, for once not sulking about the horse. That night, as Sarah lay in her bed, the image of Jedediah's smiling face lingered in her mind. The prairie wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a new beginning. Maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. Maybe, here in this harsh and unforgiving land, love could bloom anew. Threats from the past. Dust devils danced across the yard as Samuel ran towards Sarah, his small boots kicking up little puffs of ochre soil. He clutched a crumpled letter, his brow furrowed with a worry that seemed too big for his 8 years. "Mama," he said, breathless, thrusting the letter towards her. "The postman said it's important." Sarah wiped flour from her hands onto her apron. The scent of baking bread usually filled her with a quiet contentment, but Samuel's face chased it away. She took the letter, the paper rough against her calloused fingers. The return address was unfamiliar, a stark, formal script she didn't recognize. A knot tightened in her stomach. She retreated to the small porch, the wooden planks warm beneath her bare feet. Caleb was out tending to the chickens Jedediah had gifted them, his laughter echoing faintly from the coop. Sarah inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself before opening the letter. The crisp, officious language inside felt like a slap. It was from a lawyer representing her late husband's family. They demanded she sign over any and all claims to the remaining acreage back east. They claimed she had abandoned the land, forfeited her rights, and that her presence there was a blight on the family name. The final sentence dripped with thinly veiled malice. Failure to comply would result in legal action. Her hands began to tremble, the letter crinkling in her grip. The air seemed to thicken, choking her. All the fragile peace she had painstakingly built here, the tentative hope that had begun to bloom, withered under the harsh glare of the words. They hadn't forgotten her. They weren't done. A sob caught in her throat. She hadn't wanted anything from them, only to be left alone. Now, even here, hundreds of miles away, they were reaching for her, trying to drag her back into the darkness. Jedediah emerged from the barn, his silhouette framed against the setting sun. He noticed her immediately, the slump of her shoulders, the way her hand flew to her mouth. He crossed the distance between them in long, purposeful strides. "Sarah? What is it?" His voice was low, laced with concern. She couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to explain the icy fear that had gripped her. She simply held out the letter, her hand shaking so violently he had to steady it with his own. He read quickly, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. The muscles in his jaw tightened, his gaze hardening. When he finished, he crumpled the letter in his fist. "Those vultures," he spat, the words sharp and clipped. Sarah finally found her voice, a mere whisper. "What am I going to do, Jedediah? I have nothing. They'll take everything." He reached out, his large hand enveloping hers. His touch was warm, grounding. "They won't touch you, Sarah. Not while I'm here." His words, simple and direct, were a balm to her raw fear. She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt, but found only unwavering resolve. "I don't want to cause you trouble," she said, her voice still trembling. "They're powerful people. Trouble finds us all, sooner or later," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "And I faced worse. You and those boys are under my protection now. They want to fight, they'll have one." He released her hand and walked to the edge of the porch, scanning the horizon as if expecting the lawyers themselves to materialize from the dust. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across his face, highlighting the strength in his features. He stood there, a silent sentinel, a promise of protection against the encroaching darkness. The scent of burning sage drifted from the house, where Caleb, sensing the shift in the air, had started a small smudge, his own way of warding off the unknown. Sarah watched Jedediah, her heart a confusing mix of fear and gratitude. The threats from her past had arrived, but so had a defender. Standing up to bullies. The letter, an ivory slab against the table's weathered grain, hummed with a subtle threat that prickled Sarah's skin. A dozen readings hadn't dulled its barbed message, each pass only deepened the sting. Jedediah, a silent sentinel, watched her struggle. "We can't just surrender it, Jed," she finally choked out, her voice tight with suppressed panic. "It's everything we have to build security for Caleb and Samuel." Jedediah's nod was a quiet promise. "Then we stand our ground. Their arsenal wouldn't be gunpowder and steel, but words meticulously crafted and legal precedents unearthed. A war waged on paper. The town was their first battlefield." Jedediah proposed gathering accounts from the townspeople. Shopkeepers, the smith, the land assessor, anyone who might have crossed paths with her late husband's kin or caught wind of their shady dealings. A shiver of unease traced Sarah's spine. Trust was a hard-won commodity these days, but Jedediah's steady presence offered a measure of solace. Together they ventured forth. The general store was their initial destination. Mrs. Abernathy, ample and possessing a gentle spirit, recalled interactions with Sarah's in-laws years prior. "A shrewd lot," she observed, her lips pursing in disapproval. "Always on the lookout for an advantage. I've heard rumors that their dealings weren't always on the up and up." A sympathetic smile touched her lips. "It wouldn't surprise me if they tried to fleece a widow and her boys." At the blacksmith's forge, Hank, a man built like an anvil, remembered a bitter land dispute involving the Evans family. "They bled old man Hemlock dry," he growled, punctuating his statement with the clang of his hammer on red-hot metal. "Stripped him clean of his land." He readily agreed to provide a written account, his hammer ringing with righteous fury. While Sarah and Jedediah pieced together the past, Caleb took up a quest of his own. Jedediah had mentioned a land surveyor, long since retired, who had charted the area decades ago and might hold critical documentation. Caleb, blessed with keen eyesight and youthful vigor, eagerly volunteered to locate him. He spent the sun-drenched afternoon astride his pony, Dusty, crisscrossing the vast plains, inquiring at every homestead and ranch. Finally, as the horizon bled into fiery hues, he located the surveyor's son, who directed him to a cobweb-laden box overflowing with aged maps and records in the attic. With painstaking care, Caleb sifted through the fragile papers, his pulse quickening with each document he unearthed. He discovered a plat map and a surveyor's annotation that directly contradicted the land claims asserted by her in-laws. He presented it to Sarah, his face beaming with triumph. Back at the ranch, the accumulated testimonies and documents began to coalesce into a damning narrative, a chronicle of avarice and treachery. A surge of anger coursed through Sarah, tempered by a steely resolution. She would not be cowed. She refused to be their victim. That evening, after Samuel had drifted off to sleep, Sarah settled at the kitchen table, a mountain of evidence arrayed before her. She began to compose her statement, a declaration of her rights and her intentions. Jedediah sat beside her, his mere presence a grounding force. "I need to be indomitable, Jed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I must demonstrate that I will not yield." He covered her hand with his callous palm offering warmth and reassurance. "You possess strength, Sarah, more than you realize." She rehearsed her argument, pacing the confined space of the kitchen, her voice gaining timbre with each iteration. Caleb, perched on the porch steps, listened attentively, offering insights and words of encouragement. He marveled at his mother's metamorphosis, her transition from a grieving woman into a fierce protector of her family. As the moon ascended in the velvet sky, Sarah completed her statement. It transcended the bounds of a legal document. It was a testament to her fortitude, her profound love for her sons, and her unyielding refusal to be intimidated. She met Jedediah's gaze, her eyes reflecting gratitude and a nascent warmth. The path forward would be arduous, but she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her, that she would not tread it alone. She had Jedediah, Caleb, Samuel, and the unwavering allegiance of a community weary of bullies. Justice prevails. The sun beat down on Harmony Gulch as Sarah, Jedediah, Caleb, and Samuel rode into town. Dust devils danced in the street, mirroring the nervous energy thrumming through Sarah. Today was the day. The day she faced the men who had tried to steal her future, who had dismissed her grief and her children's well-being. Jedediah's presence at her side, solid and reassuring, helped to steady her. Caleb rode tall, his young face set with determination, while Samuel, usually so full of chatter, was unusually quiet, his hand gripping Sarah's skirt. Across the dusty square, a fancy carriage glinted in the sunlight. Two men, impeccably dressed in city suits that seemed wholly out of place in Harmony Gulch, stood beside it. These were the Vultures, the kin of her late husband, come to claim what they believed was theirs. Silas, the elder, stroked his chin, a smug expression plastered on his face. Beside him, younger brother Thaddeus shuffled his feet, his gaze darting nervously around the square. They looked confident, certain of their victory. Sarah dismounted, feeling the weight of the deed and plat map tucked securely inside her satchel. She smoothed down her worn calico dress, drawing strength from the feel of the rough fabric. "Ready?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Jedediah simply nodded, his eyes narrowed as he assessed their opponents. Caleb stepped forward, positioning himself protectively beside his mother. Samuel peeked out from behind Sarah, his eyes wide but filled with a flicker of defiance. As they approached, Silas's smug smile widened. Well, well, Sarah. I see you received our invitation. Perhaps you've come to your senses." Sarah stopped a few feet away, her gaze unwavering. "I received your threat, Silas, and I've come to tell you that you won't be getting anything." Silas chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "You presume too much, little widow. We have the legal right to that land. Papers don't lie." "Neither do maps," Caleb interjected, his voice clear and strong. He stepped forward, drawing the rolled-up plat map from beneath his arm. He unfurled it, the aged parchment crackling in the dry air. "This is the original plat map for the territory, registered with the land office. It clearly shows the boundaries of our property. Your claim is based on a forged document." Thaddeus visibly paled, his eyes darting to Silas, who shot him a venomous glare. Sarah opened her satchel, retrieving the deed. She held it up for all to see. "This deed is legitimate. My husband purchased this land fair and square." She paused, her voice gaining strength, resonating with the quiet fury that had been building within her for months. "You came here thinking you could bully a grieving widow and her children. You thought we were weak, but you were wrong." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd of townsfolk gathered around the square's perimeter. Faces that had once been wary, uncertain, were now filled with resolve. Old Man Hemlock, the town's most respected elder, stepped forward, leaning heavily on his cane. "We know these men, Sarah. We know their kind. They've been trying to swindle folks for years." One by one, others came forward, adding their voices to the chorus of support. The blacksmith spoke of Silas's underhanded dealings in town, a shopkeeper recounted a tale of a manipulated loan. The weight of their collective experience, their shared indignation, pressed down on the two men from the east. Silas's face, once so confident, was now flushed with anger and frustration. He sputtered, "This is outrageous. These are lies. We'll see you in court." "Go ahead," Sarah replied, her voice ringing with conviction. "We'll be waiting, and we'll have the whole town behind us." The air crackled with the unspoken power of the community standing together. Silas, realizing he was losing, grabbed Thaddeus's arm. "Let's go. This isn't worth our time," he muttered under his breath. "We'll find another way." They climbed back into their carriage, the wheels churning up dust as they sped away, leaving behind a cloud of shame and defeat. A cheer erupted from the crowd, washing over Sarah and her family. Jedediah placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his eyes conveying a silent message of pride and admiration. Caleb beamed, his youthful face alight with triumph. Samuel, emboldened by the victory, jumped up and down, clapping his hands. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of her newfound community, Sarah knew she had won. The land was hers, the future was hers, and she would protect it with every ounce of strength she possessed. Justice had prevailed. A new family. The dust hadn't settled from Silas and Thaddeus's hurried exit before the unspoken question filled the air. Jedediah's gaze held it as he looked at Sarah, a hopeful inquiry dawning in his kind eyes. Samuel's shy smiles carried the same silent yearning. Caleb, ever practical, simply grabbed tools and joined Jedediah repairing the fence, his actions a quiet affirmation. Drawn to the porch swing, Sarah found its gentle rhythm a counterpoint to the anxieties churning within her. She knew her heart's desire. Yet fear, a remnant of her past, clung to her. Jedediah joined her, his large frame settling onto the swing with surprising grace. He offered no words, no pressure, just a solid presence beside her. At last, she broke the silence. "Jedediah," she breathed, her voice fragile after everything that's happened. He turned, his expression tender and knowing. "Sarah, I'm not blind. I see your love for those boys, and theirs for you. And me." He paused, his work-worn hand covering hers. "I care for you all too." Her breath hitched. "But marriage." The word felt weighty, a stone dragging up memories of broken vows. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Marriage is what we build it to be, Sarah. A cage or a sanctuary. I want to craft a sanctuary with you, a place where we all find solace and affection." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Oh, Jedediah," she whispered, "that's what I yearn for." The wedding was unpretentious, held under the vast prairie sky. The townsfolk, so quick to offer Sarah their support, gathered to celebrate the new beginning. Martha Olson's cake promised sweeter times to come. Even cantankerous Mr. Abernathy cracked a smile. Sarah wore a simple dress, sewn from fabric Martha had treasured, its understated elegance reflecting the day's sincerity. Jedediah, in his best shirt, seemed taller, broader, radiating a quiet strength. Caleb stood beside her, a smaller reflection of the man he was becoming, his eyes sparkling with pride. Samuel, buzzing with anticipation, clutched a handful of wildflowers he'd gathered at dawn. As the preacher spoke, a sense of serenity washed over Sarah, a feeling of belonging she hadn't known since her parents' passing. Her voice rang clear and true as she pledged her vows. "I, Sarah, take you, Jedediah, to be my husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Jedediah's reply resonated with heartfelt emotion. "I, Jedediah, take you, Sarah, to be my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." A joyous cheer erupted as they kissed. Caleb squeezed her hand, his grin radiant. Samuel tossed his wildflowers skyward, a cascade of petals like celebratory rain. Later, as dusk painted the horizon with fiery hues, the new family stood together on the porch. Jedediah's arm encircled Sarah, drawing her close. Caleb leaned against his father, content in the quiet camaraderie. Samuel, nestled between Sarah and Jedediah, pointed at a shooting star blazing across the inky canvas. "Make a wish," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. Sarah met Jedediah's gaze, a silent question passing between them. He nodded, his eyes filled with love and unwavering reassurance. She closed her eyes, a single, fervent wish taking shape in her heart, that this moment, this sense of peace and unity would endure. When she opened them, the sun had almost entirely vanished, leaving only a faint glimmer on the horizon. The air, crisp and cool, carried the mingled fragrances of wildflowers and turned to earth. She looked at her sons, their faces brightened by the fading light, and at the man beside her, the man who had gifted them a haven, a family, a future. Life would undoubtedly present its trials, its tribulations. but she knew they would confront them together as a family bound by love and a shared resolve to cultivate a fulfilling life in this untamed, beautiful land. They were a family reborn, tempered by adversity and united by affection, prepared to face whatever lay ahead.